President. Now, Mr. Rutte, you spoke about listening to the people, but in Holland, of course, in 2005, you had the vote, a referendum on the Constitution. That was ignored. We got the Lisbon Treaty, which was the Constitution in another form. In 2016, the Dutch voted against the Ukrainian Association Agreement, and that's been ignored. The EU rule is to pay and obey. So if you can change that, then good luck to you. Now, Europe can have a great and prosperous future, but not if the European Union is planning it. The European Union is responsible for many of the problems that beset Europe, and your solution is always the same: to have more power. The European Union was always about creating an undemocratic state, a United States of Europe. And it's always been about deconstructing nation-states and transferring political power to Brussels. That would be bad enough in itself, but you've actually made a complete mess of governing the member states. There are two areas in which this is obvious to the ordinary citizen: the economy and security. The creation of the euro was a political project, not an economic project, and was an entirely predictable disaster, and has brought about financial austerity and unemployment. The dead hand of European bureaucracy impedes business and makes it increasingly harder for small businesses to operate, to create new jobs and to grow prosperities. Your policies have blighted the lives of millions of people. Meanwhile, our security is endangered because of the results of mass immigration. Under Mrs. Merkel's leadership, you have brought in millions of people from Africa, the Middle East and beyond, and you intend to bring in millions more. You have turned many parts of Europe into foreign countries. You use the emotional blackmail argument of talking about helping defenceless refugee families, and yet the reality is that the vast majority of these migrants are young men from Islamic countries. This is not immigration, this is invasion. Traditionally, Europe resisted Islamic invasion. Heroic struggles in the siege of Malta, at the gates of Vienna, have now been replaced by abject surrender. Islam offers two options: submit or resist. You have decided to surrender and submit on behalf of your citizens, but some states are resisting. Rebellion is now stirring in Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Austria and elsewhere. The tide is turning against the EU. And best of all, we have Brexit, a modern peasants' revolt against their out-of-touch overlords. When Britain leaves the European Union, we can point the way for a Europe of independent, democratic nation-states. Most people want a Europe of genuine trade, friendship and cooperation. They do not want rule from Brussels.
Well said, sir.
La parola all'onorevole James, non iscritto.
Good morning, Prime Minister, and thank you for coming to the Chamber and for taking questions. I've got three for you, sir. Now, the first one concerns trade, and you've made the point that the Dutch economy depends on trade with the United Kingdom as a result of the Rotterdam effect. Now, I do appreciate the points you made about the single market and why, therefore, you would want the United Kingdom to remain part of that. But you've also effectively admitted the issue of punitive tariffs post-Brexit, making no economic sense for your own country. Can we ask, therefore, that you champion not only support for a free trade deal for the United Kingdom post-Brexit, but that you also champion free trade change within the remaining European Union member states? My second question, please. You raised the issue of rule of law and electoral process. Now, you, I hope, will be aware of billionaire George Soros, a fifth columnist, to use a phrase used this morning, interfering in a democratic referendum result on Brexit in the United Kingdom. Can I ask, how would you deal with that sort of political interference, and how will you try and influence European Union policy to stop that degree of national affront to democracy and affront to national democratic process? Thank you.
Onorevole Henkel.
Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned rightfully so that with Brexit Europe would get a big hole. But you also talked about the things which Prime Minister Churchill said, that unexpected things can happen. And I think that Brexit is not only a tremendous impact on Britain, a negative impact, but also on the European Union. We recently talked to the heads of the port of Rotterdam who confirmed that. So I would like to ask you, take an initiative, because I haven't met one person at the right of myself of this Parliament, on the left of yours, who doesn't regret Brexit. Take an initiative and make Britain another offer for more autonomy in immigration, so to avoid Brexit at the last minute, because without Britain, Europe will never be complete and never be credible.
La parola ora per il gruppo Europa delle Nazioni della Libertà all'onorevole De Graaf.
Mr. President, I welcome Mr. Rutte to this Parliament, and I guess we will see him quite often in the future when he has accepted the position of Mr. Tusk as President of the European Council. When we discuss the future of the EU, we must most certainly address the situation of the rule of law in the Member States. And the majority of this Parliament has serious concerns about the rule of law in Hungary, Poland, Malta, Slovakia. And therefore it has started the monitoring group on the rule of law, and your party is member of the ALDE, and a colleague of you in this Parliament, Ms. In 't Veld, presides over this monitoring group. Now, I advise this monitoring group to take the Netherlands as a reference case. In the Netherlands, the prosecution doesn't have the obligation to follow up on any reported offence. It's to the discretion of the prosecutor's office whether to take action. And therefore, millions of citizens in the Netherlands see the prosecution as a political tool. And this was recently confirmed in a report by the WODC, a scientific institution that advises the Dutch government. And the report stated that over the last decade, there has been no prosecution of extreme left violence. And I give you another example. A group of rejected asylum seekers looking for a place to stay last month broke into a house near Amsterdam, and they claimed the property as theirs and tried to chase away the inhabitants. Although this attempt failed, the state prosecution didn't want to take legal action, and they allowed this behaviour. To me, it's absolutely clear that applying the law to one group and letting another off the hook creates legal inequality. It breaks the rule of law. And these are the Netherlands of Mr. Rutte and Mrs. In 't Veld today. I have a serious advice to Mr. Rutte with regard to his European ambitions. If you want an EU where the rule of law applies, start at home. And I quote, get your house in order. And have the prosecution take action against illegal activities in general, not just against so-called populists. And the second issue I would like to address is illegal migration. The EU is in a complete deadlock on how to deal with illegal migrants. The EU has no solutions. It doesn't close its borders. It doesn't expel rejected asylum seekers. It doesn't fight Islamization and radicalization. So I urge Mr. Rutte to distance himself from Ms. Merkel's refugee welcome policies and endorse the Visegrad approach. And he could start by helping illegal migrants a criminal offence, reject asylum to migrants who enter via safe third countries, let asylum seekers who go on holiday in their home country lose their right to stay. And when you are President of the European Council, recommend the whole package that we proposed yesterday to the Member States. Thank you.
Mr. Betten, you addressed Brexit. And can I remind you that the President of the Governor of the Central Bank of the United Kingdom has made this calculation that already now the cost of leaving United Kingdom leaving the European Union is £100 per average British family. That is the cost at the moment already British families are incurring. And that will rise. And therefore, that, maybe not for you personally, but this is happening at the moment. And what I found in the Netherlands, at this fact, but also the fact that it is hurting our collective security, is the best argument why the others need to work more closely together. So in that sense, thank you for that. But I'm still very pessimistic about the fact that you are very somber about the fact that you are leaving the European Union. And finally, Mrs. James, on Brexit, let me assure you that the Dutch government is fairly and squarely behind Michel Barnier and what he is doing as our negotiator in this process. And can you help to make sure that from the British side we get more clarity as soon as possible, particularly on the issue of the Irish border? I believe that is crucial to move and push that subject forward, which is important for all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.